Lovely. Hello everyone, and welcome back to all my friends with me, Paul. Here we are outside on a Friday afternoon. We've come across the road because it's a little bit busy over there. We thought we'd come over here in the lovely weather, winter weather, and do a video in the peace and quiet on a Friday afternoon. We are going to talk about the history, a brief history of porters and stouts. Porters and stouts, where do they originate? Hang on, that's my phone. I'm going to put it on silent. Let's do that first. Porters and stouts, a brief history, a beer's worth of history. So we have to go back about 300 years, 1720, 1730 to England. The Industrial Revolution, what's that, 1740, 1750. So around that time, obviously a lot of people were moving from the country into the cities. Most, like, you know, the one that comes to mind is London, obviously. The Industrial Revolution brought a whole bunch of people to the city from different areas. And the big breweries there at the time, Truman's, Whitbread's comes to mind, were trying to make beer for these masses that weren't there before. So they were trying to make a cheap beer. They were using a lot of brown malts. So at that time they were making brown malts of varying ABVs. It was a little bit hit and miss. And the stout came from one of those brown ales that was called a porter, because the porters in London, the dockers, the street runners, that was the beer that they all drank. It was in high demand. So porter and stout were basically just like colloquial slang words for beers. Yeah, so they started making porters out of a brown malt. And during this Industrial Revolution, there was some places in during that there was some breakthroughs in science, mainly the thermometer to tell you temperature, and a hydrometer, the second one there, a hydrometer to tell you the alcohol content of your beer. So yeah, during this time, so like that's 1740, 1750, the breweries got to have these two devices, hydrometer and a thermometer, that could really like hone in their beer style. They knew what malts to put in, and they figured out with the hydrometer that these brown ales, or these brown malts that they were using, didn't have much sugar in them. They weren't like very efficient. So around that same time, breweries started using other things to make those beers darker. They were starting to use pale malts as well, and using things like brown sugar, molasses, licorice, anything to kind of like change the color of the beer. And then we can go a little bit forward to the turn of the 18th century and what happened there, the Napoleonic Wars. That's a big part of this, 1803, 1804 I think they started. And they started making less and less beer. I guess the malts were being used for other things during wartime. I think that has a lot to do with it. So the ABV of these porter beers that these London breweries were making started to come down. You know, they started off at like that 6.5% maybe. During the Napoleonic Wars, they might have come down to 4.5%. So stout was starting to be used around that time to describe what type of porter you wanted. Like, I want a stout porter. You know, you'd go into a bar and ask for a running porter. You know, like a low alcohol porter, a keeping porter. You know, and these were all hopped beers as well. And stout was just a terminology to describe a stronger, a heavier, a more full of flavour beer, both in mouth flavour and ABV and alcohol. So yes, at the end of the Napoleonic Wars, I think that's about 1815, 1820, they decided to start taxing. England started to put in laws into their brewing. They made kind of what the Germans did. They made laws as to say what you can and can't put in beers, and basically the laws they made around that time, around 1815, 1820, was anything that you put into a beer now has to be taxed. So that was the whole reason, basically, for doing that. Around this time as well, we have to bring in Ireland, because Ireland at this stage were like, well, we have the ingredients to make these beers, so we're just going to use the pale barley, and at this time the brown malts. The people that were making these brown malts had figured out a way to make a roasted malt. So instead of a brown malt, we're getting a dark malt, like black, like roasted coffee, and it still had sugar in it. So people started using pale malts for 95% of the base malt, and then just using a little bit of these darker malts, these roasted malts, to get the color into the beer. I should probably have a sip. So the Irish were doing that. So where are we? We're at the 1820s. So yeah, stouts just tended to be, they dropped the porter off around the 1820s, 1830s. So instead of going into a bar and saying, I would like a stout porter, you just go in and ask for a stout, and then you were talking about. Around the turn of the 20th century, the style of beer started to get kind of pushed aside, because you had two other wars there. You had the Great War and you had World War II. Again, in this stage, I digress, but Ireland was neutral in both of these wars, so they could continue making that dry style of Irish stout all throughout the wars. And after World War II, it became the most popular beer in Ireland, and it has been, I think, since. It's a very popular beer. Stouts. Not naming any breweries in Ireland, but we can all think of one. So yeah, we're at the turn of the century, and they kind of dropped off in the UK, the stout and porter styles, and they didn't really make a resurgence until the 1960s, 70s. And then we can get America to come into this, because America at this stage is they've been making beers over there. Pardon me. I mean, we know they were making stouts and porters in America in the 17th century. Not the 17th century, the 1700s. They were making beer in the 1700s around the New England area, and that was much more influenced by the German diaspora in America. So they were using lager yeasts. They were using more sugars to get the flavor. So, America has a sordid history with porters and stouts, different from the UK. Pardon me. Another one we have to mention here is Imperial stouts and Baltic porters. The Russian Imperial stouts, the Baltic porters. Around the 1700s, 1800s, there was a big export market, foreign market to the imperial courts of Russia and the Baltic states. And a lot of the beer that was coming out of London was sent there. A lot of the beer that was came to Australia was porters as well. I mean, even Captain Cook on the Endeavour was writing about how they had porters and stouts on that boat for more than a year, and they were described as excellent, I think. I'm paraphrasing there, but these beers were being put on boats and being sent to every which way. But yes, definitely Imperial stouts in Russia and the Baltic states, the Baltic porters. They were high ABV, generally because they thought, which is true, that the higher ABV, the less the freezing temperatures would affect the beer. That is to say, it wouldn't freeze the beer. And then where are we? I kind of digressed there. We can go back to America, and we're into New Age stouts. So here we are, 1970s, 1980s, the craft beer revolution. And we've got all these different types of stouts now. We've got milk stouts with lactose in it. We've got breakfast stouts. We've got oyster stouts. We've got... I'm missing a few there. We've got bourbon barrel-aged stouts, some of my favorites. They're just really good beers to drink in winter. Stouts are some of my favorite beers. So that's a little bit of a brief history on porters and stouts. I've probably skipped a few things there and missed a few significant things. Do let me know in the comments if I've missed something. Yes, I have nothing else to say. I thought it was going to be a beer's worth. It's not quite. This is a lovely coconut and coffee porter from Jervis Bay. I'm trying to finish it, but I don't want to rush it. So I'll leave you with that. Thank you for listening to me. I've been Paul, you've been you. I'll see you next time.
Awesome.
Hey.
Before we stop, I reckon, did we want to just... So there was a question way back when we did the history of IPAs video.
Oh, yeah?
And I guess we could just jump in as well if you want to. So we got, can you elaborate on the brewing process before refrigeration was invented and how it works with barrels? That was from Aidan Hennig.
Can I elaborate what happened before refrigeration? Yeah, definitely. Before refrigeration, you basically had to brew by the time of year, right? You knew if you were brewing beer in this time of year, it's going to take 3 months to make the beer, 2 months to condition it, so it's going to be drinkable. Then you had to you were relying on the elements to refrigerate or to condition your beer. There was no refrigeration to do that in that way. But yes, before they would put it in wood. This is why in Germany there's so many names that have to do with the months of the years and things like that, or they use that terminology when they're describing certain beer styles. You knew that it was wintertime and you had 5 to 6 months at below 5 degrees Celsius, so you could make these styles of beer. You knew when the spring came around that you only had this amount of time to make. So yeah, I guess the answer to that one in a nutshell is you were at the beck and call of the elements before refrigeration. Smart brewers.
Awesome.